I used to be the active vice president of Bruce. I worked here for 13 years. Bruce brought me up to LA. I've been in the car business all my life, kind of like Bruce. But more importantly, you're here kind of in what I would call car nirvana, mecca, whatever you want to call it. I've been in the business 33 years, something like that. And Bruce was somebody I always kind of followed on my camera. He was a customizer. I don't know if anybody remembers that. He used to do big semi-trucks. He was a GM guy. But he was a GM guy. He used to do a lot of work for Chevy. He did custom Hummers. He did custom Porsches. He was a Lamborghini dealer for a while. In fact, he sold more Lamborghinis out of his Water Street building than anybody else in California. In the building in Water Street. So Bruce was raised here. He's been doing, his parents have been in the car business. They were what is now North Bay Ford. They own that in the Lincoln Mercury store, Palomar Lincoln Mercury. And Bruce, at one point with his father, got in kind of a tiff and got in an argument. And he wanted to go one way with the business, and Bruce wanted to go another way. And Bruce decided to start his own deal. And he took that little building on Water Street, kind of right there, and by the 24-hour fitness, where it's at now, which was the Ford store. Took that little building there and started what is today Canepa. Humble beginnings. He was a race car driver. He drove for Porsche. He was actually a sponsored Porsche driver. We'll see his cars upstairs. But over this time frame, basically since 1980, 81, he's been building this collection of cars that you see here today in this business. So from Water Street, he moved into here in 2006, actually 2005. He brought me up here in 2006. It was actually 2007. 2007. So he was here like late 2005. When I moved in here, those offices were barely done. There was really, the museum wasn't open. And we just kind of watched this grow. I walked away about 2 years ago, just to follow my own dreams and do some other stuff. I still buy for Bruce. I still buy a lot of cars for Bruce. In fact, this car was bought by Red Skelton the first time around by me. So there's a lot of cars here I've seen, like, oh yeah, I bought that a while ago. This bought from Mexico back in the day. Some cool stories. So there's some cool things here, kind of like old home week for me. I still live in Santa Cruz now. But all that to say is we have a good working relationship. We're here for this. And I appreciate you guys coming. Bruce has been really kind of growing this business to be something that nobody in the industry is doing, at least not in America. I don't know anybody in Europe that's even doing this, but he really has taken this to another level. The business is still run on the front end, what we call sales. This is a business of cash flow. You need cash flow to keep 70,000 plus square feet running. He has 64, 65 employees now. So you need cash flow. Well, how do you keep cash flow going? You have to buy and sell cars. So this is still the major part of his business. Most of his business is here to fund this facility, which funds the things we're going to see in the back. We are always and constantly looking for new cars to put on the showroom. We morphed into some of these modern cars, which I never thought I'd see the day when Bruce was selling. Not that we wouldn't sell Ford GTs, but an Aston Martin. I never thought I'd see the day when Bruce was doing a brand new Porsche, 991. We've been so fixated on older Porsches and Carrera GTs and things like that. But the market has shifted, and the young tech guys and people, there's a lot of people with money that are way under than I am. And they've shifted into the modern cars, the modern era sports cars. And now Porsche's making more sports cars than they've ever made. It's crazy. I was just reading some article going back to things like this, the 928, the Mercedes Porsche collaboration, which is 500, the Audi S2. This was made in the 928 Porsche facility. So where Porsche made the 928, this car was made side by side with the Audi S2. And that's the kind of space they had. They had the room to collaborate with Mercedes-Benz and Audi to do that. At the time, the Porsche 968, which was the successor to the 944, they only made 12,000 of those cars for 5 years. You couldn't make a car today, except for Bugatti that would sell for $3 million, but you only make 12,000 of them in a 5-year production. You couldn't even spend the engineering time to make 12,000 cars. So nowadays, the new Porsche looks at a new Porsche on a basis and say they have to sell 100,000 a year to even be in business. It's just a crazy market what's going on. And that's just kind of what they've done. I'm a big Porsche guy, 964 RS, 993 RS. They made 1,500 964 RSs. And then, how many 964s do they make? 10,000, 12,000 cars total? Actually, I think it's 34,000 cars total. But 1,500 were the hot one. They don't have that kind of space anymore. They make more 993, they make more GT3 RSs now than they made Porsche 911s in 1980 per year. So the market has changed. There's more money than ever, so the market has changed. All that to say is we still love used cars. We still love vintage cars. And we're always looking for vintage cars. We're looking for things like the 190, 300 SLs, 580s, Porsches, anything like that. And we go to the next level. Any car you see here, you'll get to see the systems and how everything works. Other than plating, chrome plating, magnesium plating, cat plating, we do everything in-house. Paint shop, metal shop, we can fab things here, we can do anything in-house except for plating. That's kind of the way he's done it. Everything in one space. When he was on Water Street, he used to do it over 6 buildings. That was just a logistical nightmare. Move one car to here, go to this place, cars would get hit on the street, and just, you know, it was a nightmare. So when he brought this place, what he's created here is unlike anything I've ever seen. And like I said, I've been doing this a long time, I've been on the best shops. But he goes to the next level. When you see of a car out there, the detail work, every suspension piece is detailed like that. 6x6 out there. There's not a speck of dust on the suspension. You know, shocks on that car just by itself. You look at what we do for 959, what we do to every car that comes through, the systems that go through, make sure everything works. When you, Bruce being a race car driver, when you leave here in a car that you bought from Bruce, you know that car is so right. You know that car handles right. You know that, like, wait, my car, you might have had the same model. My car never turned in like this. You never had that feel, because he takes everything from that same basis. Now, obviously, it doesn't translate streets or track all the time, but he does come to the point where every car is looked at, every car is test driven by him, and he just puts that level of detail into everything he has. The Mark II Jaguar, that is a well sorted. It's still a Jaguar. It still has its problems. It's still, you know, but that is still a fantastic car to drive. It's just because it was done here. It was just something that he's gone through every system, and it's just what we do. This Woody. I'll tell you the story of this Woody because it kind of tells you what happened. This car was bought from the governor of Mexico's car in Mexico City. And in Mexico at the time, you could only buy gas on certain days of the week, depending on what your license was. Kind of like when we had gas prices. So this car, throughout its life, always had diplomatic plates. It could buy gas 7 days a week. It had it could go through every checkpoint without any problems. A young kid who was in love with this car in Texas bought the car. When he brought it over the border, the secondary, we brought into secondary, and because it had government plates on it, they thought he was hustling drugs across. So the whole car was kind of torn apart. This poor kid was invested his life in it. They got it into Texas, and he couldn't afford to finish the car. So after he called us a year, it took a year to get the deal done. He called us, and we helped you finish it, help you sell it if you want. No, I really want to finish it, but I want to sell it to this night. Well, we ended up finally negotiating a deal with him, buying it as well, as is. But this is all original wood. The car literally looks like this. The original color, it's been painted. Original color, but it's literally just paint, and then we re-chrome the car. And that's all we've done to the car. The car is all original interior, but that car was literally like, that's a car that, the story was too cool. We could not say, we got to have that car. It just was that car. So it was owned by the governor of Mexico from 1948 to however long he was, I don't know how long he was the governor. I think he owned it for most of his life, because always in the family. And this kid bought it in 2008, and I bought it right after that. Yeah, I know they have a governor too. It wasn't the president, it was the governor. It was the guy who handled one of the places. I don't know if it was Chicago or whatever. He was the governor of one of the little cities. Or provinces, whatever they call it. But it's just a cool story. He had diplomatic plates and go anywhere, so when he brought it across. But this is the car that we literally saw it, and we said, you know, that wood doesn't need to be touched. We don't need to do anything. The glass, you can still see it's delaminated. But everything else in that 48 Woody works perfectly. The thing rides great, it drives great, shocks have been done. You can literally take that thing anywhere and feel comfortable to drive. That's how cars leave Bruce. That's what they do here at Canepa. So everything on this floor is for sale. You can write checks to me. Anything you want. But everything's for sale. It's the first time in a long time I've seen spots available. The business is booming. We cannot get enough cars. It is a really, really crazy time in the used car market. And I think right now, there's a lot of volatility. I think it's a really good time to be in the used car market. If you have a stock portfolio, not trying to sell cars, I don't work for person one from that standpoint, but if you have a stock portfolio and you're moving into other stuff, put in classic cars, something you always dreamed of. This is a good place to do it. If you have it. This is a car Bruce bought, this little 360, this white, this ivory car with red interior. Bruce bought that car in 2001, sold it to a client in 2006, and we just got it back. And that client, from 2006 to 2021, put 600 miles on it. That's all we did. So we get a lot of cars back. In fact, it's a good part of our business. It's buying back cars that we've sold before. The little yellow 356, same thing. I think we've sold that car 3 times now. It just happened. The Woody, this is the second time we've sold the Woody. Yeah, I mean, it's just the way the business happens. The little Andal 993, 3.8, the white car here with the titanium wheels. That's a car that I bought in San Diego a few years back. It had ugly tan interior in it. I mean, it was hideous. It was, no offense to Porsche. They make this one light tan that is just terrible. It had that color in it. We bought it for, I paid well for it, but I also got a pretty good deal. Another deal that took 6 months to negotiate. I told the guy on the phone, hey, listen, I'll pay this for it. 6 months later, you want to still pay that for the car? No, I'll pay $5,000 less now. But we bought the car. Then Bruce brought it here. Completely changed the interior and sorted it out. It's one of 11 cars made. So it's a 3.8 liter motor from versus 3.6. It is a C2S. One of 11 cars made, and it worked. And we changed it, made it a little better, put our touches on it, and sorted it out, and here it is, the second time again for sale. The Porsche GT, Carrera GT prototype. That's a car that we have, and it's officially for sale now. That is the prototype Carrera GT. Porsche had another one, they had to crash, and that is the car that's the remainder car. That's the car that was the showpiece that they took to all the auto shows. It was sold to Jerry Seinfeld, and then the car was taken to auction, Amelia Island, and Porsche, 2 hours before the auction, told Jerry he could not sell it at an auction. It had to be sold to somebody that Porsche allowed. So a deal was struck, and Bruce bought it from Jerry, and the car technically, it has a working motor, but it doesn't have the computer chip that makes it work. So when Bruce sells it, there's only going to be a few people that Bruce can sell it to that can actually get that computer chip from Porsche to let the car drive. So that's how unique that car is. You know, we just got cool stuff, just what we do. Yes.
Over there for sale?
Yes, it is. Everything on this floor is for sale. The dragster's for sale.
The dragster.
Dragster's for sale. That's a Fuller chassis, which was made right next door. Fuller chassis was a little Quonset hut. So that dragster was made in the Quonset hut next door in the 60s, in the 70s. That's a Fuller chassis made right here. So kind of cool. Some Scotts Valley history there. So we can come back here and take photos later. What I'd like to do now, if we can, is if anybody doesn't have questions here, if you have questions, feel free to ask them now. But you're welcome to come back here and take photos. If we could, take the stairs up and we'll go up to the museum. If anybody doesn't want to go the stairs, there is an elevator. Right when you make the right around the reception desk, there's an elevator straight ahead. Just push floor 2, it'll take you up there. But either way, steps or stairs, and let's all gravitate upstairs to the museum.
It's been going up like crazy.
All right. Let's start with the other car. I'm sorry. So when you're all ready, you can gather over here by me, go through the museum, and kind of tell you what happened here. How this came to be. So as I mentioned, Bruce was a race car driver. He's actually a really, really good wheel. That guy can drive a car. And he grew up driving sprint cars. The orange car in the very back, number 11. That was his sprint car. And I'm a little kid from Ascot, from Manhattan Beach. At the time, when I was in the 70s, my mom would let me ride my bike to Ascot Raceway, and she'd pick me up, come dark, and put the bike in the back of the car. It wasn't the easiest ride for me, but I could get there on a Saturday and watch the races, whether it be motorcycle or sprint cars or things like that. And I'll never forget being there, and about 77, I was 10 years old, and this orange sprint car flips, goes out of the track, and lands on top of a brand new Ford wagon. That was Bruce Canepa in that car over there. When I was 10 years old. It's one of those things you never forget. But being a little Manhattan Beach kid, I grew up down the street from Vasha Polak. He had a BMW store, he had a Porsche store, and I used to deliver the paper to him and his wife. They were estranged, they lived in 2 separate houses on the same street. And Vasha was one of those eccentric guys, really cool, Czech guy, lots of influence, bigger guy, but the guy could definitely wheel a car. He raced really well, he had a really successful race team. And I was one of those kids he just liked because I always got the paper on his front door. Him and his wife would fight over who was going to tip me more. And one day I'm riding by, I was pretty young. We could deliver the paper at 10 years old, and I started at 10 because I had dreams. I had a motorcycle, I wanted to fix my motorcycle. I had bicycles, so I needed to make money. But he had 3 cars. It was the first time I ever saw a stacker in the garage. And I didn't know it was Vasha Polak at the time. It was the first month of delivering the paper. And I'd taken over a route for another kid, and I say, those are great cars. And long story short, he said, well, if you can name all 3 of them, I'll take you for a ride. And so my dad had a little 356, and so it was pretty straightforward. So that's a Speedster, that's a 930 turbo, and I didn't call it a turbo car, I called it a 930 turbo, and I said, and that's a 550 Spider. So if you can say it's an A or a pre-A, I'll take you for a ride in that. And I said, I can't tell because the back's sticking out. And he looked at me and he said, come on, kid. And he walked me inside, and it was an A, so it was a later car. And I ended up, because my dad had a 56, I didn't want to go in that little boring Speedster. So I ended up going for a ride in a little 550 Spider at 10 years old. I did have to ask my mom. I didn't just, willy-nilly get some car with some old man. But all that to say is, he kind of allowed me at that point to ride my little Schwinn Cruiser, which I still have, to his bike shop, to his Porsche store, and I could sit in any of the race cars. He would let me park my bike in the shop, and I could go inside, and just, if anybody asked questions, Vasha sent me here, and he had his card, and I could do whatever I wanted to do. I could sit in any car. So my love, and my dad already had a Porsche, so my love for Porsche kind of grew there. Long story short, I got into selling cars. I worked for the largest racing team in the world for a while, which was Roush Racing. We owned Pro Drive, which was the company that handled all the rally cars. We did a lot of cool stuff, and I was working for them. I was also a big Ford guy, that GM thing we talked about earlier, and a Porsche guy. But when I came here, the 3 cars I knew a lot about were BMWs, because no matter who you are, you can't afford a Porsche, you can afford a BMW. So I've always had a BMW in my career, didn't always have a Porsche. I've got lots of kids, can't always afford a Porsche with kids. Sometimes they just don't fit, and you need room. I live in, I don't have a big garage, and I don't have a lot of space. But I've always had a BMW kind of since the very first car I bought. And Vasha was a BMW dealer, which would help me a lot, and I had a little 323. But all that to say is my love for cars started young. Well, Bruce's love for cars started even younger. Not even younger. He's older than me, so he's been doing this a lot longer. But he started racing. He got out of that because his parents wanted him to race sprint cars. And George Dyer, that's why I'm standing by this road, was a gentleman who lived up here in the Bay Area, just after Palo Alto, or I think just after Mountain View area. No, just after Palo Alto. And George Dyer had this for sale. and he called Bruce and said, hey, you gotta come now, because Bruce wanted to get in the road racing. You gotta come now, and you gotta take all the spare parts, because I'm leaving out of town, and if you don't take all the spare parts now, I might change my mind. So Bruce brought a trailer, thinking he was gonna be able to drive, fit the trailer and all the spare parts in. Well, he had every spare part for this thing. He had all of it. And the only reason why George Dyer was getting rid of this car, because he wanted to go back to an RSR, which is a non-turbocharged car. These single turbo early cars were really difficult to drive. Not saying the later turbo cars were not difficult to drive as well, like the K4, but they were really difficult to drive. Bruce couldn't fit all the parts in. These cars have headlights. He drove this home to Santa Cruz from George Dyer's place to get it home, because he couldn't fit all the parts in. And he had brought a guy with him to help load parts. And this car, just a few months later, he got third place at Daytona 24 hour. Right there, that's this car with the 935 frame. This is the same car. They made 10 of these cars only. We have another one in the back. But they made 10 934 and a half. And Bruce, because he put it on, got third place overall at Daytona, Porsche took note. So in 1979, Porsche built him the last 79 935. And that's in the back. We'll look at that. He's taking it, he's racing that at Monterey this year, like he always does. He's taking his 962 as well. But that put him in the driver's seat with Porsche. And he literally raced next to John Player, John Paul Jr., John Paul Sr., that Corvette over there, in their 935s or their Corvettes. He raced against Sean Fitzpatrick, he raced against Busby, he raced against all the best drivers on the planet. And he was good. He went to Portland, put it on the pole. At Portland, he was a really good driver. Again, I told you he was Paris in the car business. 1980, he wanted to race, but he also loved this side of the business. And in 1980, he kind of gave up his professional racing career to start what we see here. And this is the first car that was in his collection, in his 79 935. These are the two cars that are still here. And then this collection of cars you see here in the museum has grown over time. He bought back his sprint car, the original sprint car he used to race, from that crazy guy, Jim Stacy. If you look up Jim Stacy, you'll get a really unique story. Guy lives in South Africa on a boat offshore because he's not allowed to be on the shore. He has the helicopter in to grab whatever he wants to get medical assistance before he brings a medical guy out to his boat, because he's not allowed to be on shore because he's still being chased around the world by a few people. So he lives on a boat, kind of like in a non-extradition country. But Jim Stacy was the guy responsible because he thought Bruce was a good driver, and Bruce is a good driver. But he's got some cool story. The little SoCal Speed Shop car was down in the Carmel area. And if any of you are in the cars, and you know cars, you know who Bruce Meyer is. Bruce Meyer is Bruce Canepa's close friend. And Bruce Meyer has the Pearson Brothers Coupe, which is probably arguably the other cool, 33, 34, Bonneville Speed Flat car. And Don Orozco had that car in Carmel. And the day they were going to Prehistorics, which is the race, and they were driving down, and Bruce Meyer was in the car with Bruce Canepa, and Bruce Meyer didn't answer his phone, and the next call was to Bruce Canepa, and it happened to be Don Orozco. And Don Orozco, because they always said, if you ever sell it, well, Bruce said, hey, we gotta take a small stop before we go to the track. And they stopped at Don Orozco's place, and Bruce wrote him a check and said, I'll be back to pick it up Monday. Right in front of his best friend. But Bruce Meyer has the Pearson Brothers Coupe, and then that is the coolest car ever. That's the Zit. That is probably the coolest hot rod. Being from Southern California, that is arguably the coolest hot rod maybe ever built. It was a car that drag raced. It went to Bonneville. It broke a bunch of records. 173 miles an hour in 1853 in a car that literally is 4 inches off the ground and has no brakes. It's just a really cool car. The motor's pushed all the way back. It's got a flathead in it with a crank-driven supercharger. It's the carburetors sit on the front of the motor. They don't sit on top of the motor. It's so unique and so beautifully built. And that car is basically, it's been restored, but that is as it was built, as you can see in the picture on the top. As it was built in 53. It really hasn't changed much since then. And that's just a cool piece of history. We have the very first Gurney Eagle, the number 31 car. Anybody ever heard of the Gurney flap? Yep. Okay. That's the very first car the Gurney flap was actually used on. And the only reason why it came out of necessity, he was going around the track in Indianapolis and Dan said, I'm not getting any downforce. The car wants to lift. well, it's got split pipes in the back, and they couldn't, once the car would get to speed, it couldn't get any downforce. So Dan literally said, hey, what if we just put an aluminum piece here and just put a little freaking angle on it, get some downforce. And literally the gurney flap was born in that car. And that is the very first Gurney Eagle. We bought that at auction. The car was well documented, and we completely restored it here in house. Everything was done here. New fuel cells, everything. This car can be driven, can be run. It is that kind of car. That leads us to probably the two coolest cars. Somebody asked about what we're taking to Pebble Beach. We're taking 8 cars to Pebble Beach. 2 of them are right here. So this says 917K. K simply means German for compact, basically. So this is the short version of the 917, the 917 Coupe. This is the car that Pedro Rodriguez in 1970 won the 24-hour Daytona. Just a very, very, very cool car. 12-cylinder, normally aspirated. You know, what is it, 1,700 pounds, and it weighs nothing. Not a ton of horsepower in the day, but this car in Le Mans would do about 235 down the straight, somewhere around there. In 1970, 1969. So this car was created in 1969. What were we doing in America in 1969? Putting men on the moon. Right? Porsche was built the fastest cars on the planet. And they were holding down the back end with ski bindings. Because, you know, ski bindings work for everything, including keeping the tail section down. This is also the very first car that what we now call a donut spare was created for. It's a true story. For racing. So Le Mans rules at one point required a passenger seat, so all these cars fit a passenger. It's still actually, technically, this is the latest Le Mans car we have in here. Technically, that has room for a passenger seat. They don't have to run it anymore. Because it's a gentleman's sport, they also needed room for a toolbox, and they needed room for a spare tire. So in 1969, 70, up until 73 or 4, I think, they still required a spare tire. So Porsche, all it had to be was a wheel, and it had to have a tire. The wheel had to fit both front and back, and it had to have a tire. But in the rules, this is reading through the line, in the rules, it did not have to be an actual working size tire. It just had to be a tire. So the very first donut spare was created for this car. It's here right here. So if you guys want to come back here when you have a chance, you can look at the very first donut. The very first car that had a donut spare was a 73 RS, which there's an orange one on the showroom floor with a yellow one in the back. So Porsche is literally the company you can blame for the donut spare. It came on this car right here, on the 917. That car morphed into what we call the 91710, became the 91730, 91730s, arguably the fastest car on the planet for a long time. Mark Donohue set the closed course record of 256 miles an hour in 1975 at Darlington Raceway or Talladega. And that record stood for like 24 years for closed circuit. So he did a lap of 256 miles an hour. This is a twin turbocharged 12-cylinder motor that literally goes 0 to 200 in 12 seconds. The whole time it's doing that, it's spinning the tire. It's a 4-speed gearbox, not a 5-speed. If it had a 5-speed, I don't know at the time, they could have built a 5-speed that was strong enough. But if it had a 5-speed, they say it would have done 260. But there's no place except for Le Mans. These cars never racing in Le Mans, open top cars. There's no place except for Le Mans that has long enough straight for that to happen. So these cars were just fine with 4-speed. This is actually the car that killed the Can-Am series. It was a Canadian-American series because, first of all, they were dangerous cars. You had a 98-pound chassis made out of aluminum. So basically a lawn chair. So if you look, it literally looks like a lawn chair you pull out. You have a seat, your feet sit in front of the front axle. So when you're in this car, my feet go about 3 inches above the front axle. And the motor is right behind you. Held up by aluminum, no steel. And when you crash, that motor either comes through or your feet come to you. There's no other way around it. Or the worst case scenario, both things happen. And the motor comes up and hopefully that kills you and leaves your feet are smashed. So there's only 3 major accidents in these cars, but all 3 of them were fatal. They just were that kind of car.
But that injection seat is important.
Yeah, well, you know, that was James Bond was already out, but it was a temperamental little thing. You know, airplanes and James Bond were the only ones that did. But these cars are literally, they were so fast, what they could do, and they were reliable, which made these cars so good in endurance racing, is their reliability of them. So that car morphed into what we call the 956, 962, which is arguably the winningest. The reason why Porsche let Audi catch up with a few wins at Le Mans is because Porsche had so many wins at Le Mans. Go ahead. Try to do it. But this was the most successful campaign endurance car ever made, the 956, 962. The 956 is virtually the same car. It's a 6-cylinder, twin turbocharged motor, so it's basically a 911 motor. Small displacement, twin turbo. But the 956 had the same problem this car had. Your feet sat in front of the front axles. So for US racing, the sanctioning bodies in America made you push the front axle out. So Porsche American wisdom didn't change the geometry of the chassis. They created longer suspension pieces and pushed the axles out. And these cars literally had no toe intercast. You couldn't adjust the alignment. So once they were set, there was very little alignment adjustment. They literally would lift one wheel, about 2 inches of the wheel on either side when they were turning hard, would come off, and that's all that would be seen on the outside wheel, because that's how bad the suspension was. But because they were so reliable, they just didn't care. That's how, because they just knew that everybody else was going to break before the end of the race. We don't care. We're going to win the race. Porsche had a little bit of arrogance in it, just a little. And let's face it, Mercedes wasn't racing at the time, so they didn't have much to compete with. They were kind of, but these are the most successfully campaigned cars in endurance racing history. And this is the car that got second in Le Mans. It is technically for sale, technically, because now Bruce has his own, he's racing that, I'll show you that later. But just a little bit, and there's a lot of Porsche history here. The 934.5 I told you about has an aluminum roll bar. That's actually been replaced, I think, to steel. No, that one's still aluminum. His 935 has been replaced to steel. But they had aluminum roll bars. And in Porsche's driver meeting, Bruce was there with Frau Bear. Frau Bear was what we call the inside face of Porsche racing, was a female German lady. And then the gentleman who ran the outside, the face of Porsche racing, was a whole different guy, and super personable and affable, and just a different thing. In the driver's meeting in 79, Bruce is there, and they're in Germany, Porsche driver's meeting, and one of the drivers, nobody will say who it is, said, "What is this aluminum roll bar? Is this designed to knock us out before we die? Or pierce our helmet before we die? Because this isn't going to do anything." And it was basically, there to, just because they required certain diameter roll bar, and that's all they required, right? So Frau Bear literally deadpan, and this comes from multiple racers, the Whittington brothers, Bruce Canepa, John Fitzpatrick, all the guys would still say, Frau Bear deadpan said, "If you don't like it, I'm going to tell you to drive." Like, this is just the way it is. You want to change Porsche? Get out of it. We're not asking you to change. Then Porsche and Infinite Wisdom went to a two company. They got rid of the 935 factory team. We'll come back to this car. So they went to Ghost to Primer. And so this is the Primer car. So Porsche went more speed. And Porsche was relatively unknown. Design more functional, still has to be beautiful. So they went to Ghost and Primer. They got on the 935. So they let aftermarket race teams run it. The rules state that you had to have a back window, you had to have a profile of the car for Group 5 racing, Group 4 racing as well. So, Yost and Primer, in their summary read, it was actually Primer first, read throughout the line and said, "Okay, well, we're keeping the profile of the car. We actually technically have the back window in there. There's nothing in the rules that says we can't put another window on top of it, because it still has the profile. It still has the back window, still has the fitment for the back window from the factory Porsche. But they added this, made a bigger wing, 11 miles an hour faster than the law, by reading between the lines. Everybody's cheating. It's just, which way are you cheating? Are you cheating with the rules that are placed before you? And that's what Porsche was great to get to that. That's what most racing teams, Dan Gurney making the Gurney flags. It wasn't in the rules, you couldn't put it there. You just had to have the motor where it was. It's the first year of true rear engine cars, where it was completely mid, and he's like, "I'm going to make a Gurney flag." Just reading between in the lines. The Porsche did this 11 miles an hour faster than the model, and a car went out. Simply by, all we have to do is add another space, 4 inches of body, keep both windows in there, and within the rules, and get 11 miles an hour. So that's what they did. This is the car that took out Kart Indy. When they were going so fast that they were getting dizzy at Texas Motor Speedway, because it was a circular track and they were going so fast, 200, this This is the car that basically goes Mark on the record at 250 miles an hour. So you're going 250 miles an hour on a mile track. Speed, average speed. So this is the car, these cars, this era, the Chevy motors, the Honda motors, the Ford Cosworth motors, those are the motors that were doing it. They literally said, okay, that's enough. Drivers were literally getting vertigo. They're starting to go so fast, they're going crazy. So every car after this became V10. This is the last or the fastest any cars ever made. This is the only time Indy could compete with Formula 1. And it still didn't handle very well, but they handled decently, just not as good as Formula 1. It was the only time they could stop Formula 1. So a lot of history up here. And all these cars are owned by Bruce. A lot of you might recognize that little Abarth over there. That car was a Santa Cruz local car forever. Oh, what's that? These cars are all drained. They're not being used. The cars he uses, this 917 he uses occasionally. That car's, it'll be ready to fire at any time. This car he hasn't used in years. Probably won't be fired ever again. That's not true. It has to be started. Actually, this car is going to Pebble Beach. It has to be started for Pebble Beach. So it'll be pulled out of here. It's already detailed. One more thing before we go down, unless you have questions. Oh, two more things. Anybody remember the Trans Am series and how cool it used to be? Going to your Ford dealership or your AMC dealership or your Chevy dealership and a Camaro or a Javelin, and it looked like the car they were racing. So in the rules of Trans Am, the motor, everything on these cars that came had to come from the parts department of this respected company. So Ford, Budmore Racing, Chevy had Chaparral. There was a lot of great race teams out there, and they had 350 cubic inch, 362 I think was the max. So 351, but 360 cubic inch, 362, somewhere in that. I don't remember exactly the numbers. But all the things had to be parts. So the motors, they knew these AMC motors were pretty good. They were going to be all right. And they were going to be successful. They could make horsepower. The problem is they didn't have any parts. Remember Ford had already won the law 4 times. Chevy, a lot of endurance racing, for the Corvettes and things like that. But AMC Javelin really kind of had nothing. They just had a cool motor and a good looking car. So what they did, Penske was also what? A Porsche team. So they went to Porsche and said, one of the mechanics there, in fact, it wasn't one of the mechanics, it was Mark Downey, said, hey, I think a 917 brake will fit on a Javelin. Because really they're only 15-inch tires and wheels. So I think a 917 brake will fit on a Javelin. So sure enough, they took brakes from a 917, drilled them for studs, and said, oh my God, they fit. Roger Penske called Porsche, or the guy from Roger Penske called Porsche. They bought every set of 935 brakes they could get. They sent them to AMC, gave them a part number, put them in a catalog, and now all of a sudden, they're parts you can buy right out of an AMC catalog. And those now have 917 brakes. They didn't, they don't have. Nobody could afford to fix them with their 917 brakes. So this car became very successful. I love this picture because that's Roger Penske in the front. Mark Donahue sitting in the car. Mark Donahue got hurt in a 935, broke both his feet. So Peter Revson, the heir of the Revlon Pro, came in and drove the car for the remainder of the season. Also was an actor, a really good looking guy. But Mark Donahue was kind of Penske's #1 driver, racing 917, broke all his records. George Foreman. So that's Penske with his Lacoste shirt on, his Ferragamo shoes, and his slacks, and he's carrying a fire extinguisher and a jackhammer. That guy works that hard today. That's just who he is. That's why he's been so successful. That's why he still goes to Indy and wins races as a team owner. But this is that's the story of the Javelin. This is Bruce's personal car, one of his favorite cars to drive. He loves this car. He's not driving this year because Ford's the featured mark. And what that means is that basically, just going to be honest, politics, Ford's going to win. So, probably Jim Farley in the Ford. I'm marking my words. Saturday, Pebble Beach. What is that, August 14th, I think it is. August 14th, I guarantee the Trans Am race will probably be Jim Farley in a Ford, but more. Just fun, that's what's going to do. But, I don't think you can take bets on it, but if you're a betting man, that's when I take, or betting lady. Because it is Ford feature. So Bruce isn't going to race it. He's like, I don't want to just go play. I want to win. So he's like, I'm not taking those out. Plus, he's got 8 cars on the lot the next day, so he's not driving this car. Too many cars the days to be in the car. So So those two cars are going to Pebble Beach. And then this is the car that kind of, everybody remember the Superbird? Yeah. Okay. So Richard Petty was a big Plymouth driver, and Dodge, Plymouth, they had some internal fighting. Of course, just like Ford, Mercury, Chevy, Cadillac. Internal fighting. So Richard Petty got really pissed off because he wasn't going to get a Superbird. They already turned that car over to somebody else. We have the car in the back. I think we still have it in the back. So he, in his infinite wisdom, said, all right, I'm going to take my name and I'm going to go to Ford Motor Company. For 1 year, Richard Petty raced for Ford, 1969 Ford Trent. He hated the car the first moment he got in the car. And then the very first race, he won Riverside. So then he raced his car for a whole year, and then guess what happened? He literally equaled in points. He lost by 1 point in the 69 series. So guess what Plymouth did in 1970? Gave him a Superbird. So he got what he wanted, and then he went on to win, his 200 races by 1980. But this is the only year that Petty, and this car was built, specifically, this is the car we bought from Petty himself, and Bruce restored it here. Just one of those cars. And everybody loves the cage. Just love the cage. And then Jim Stacy, seriously, look that guy up. You guys will be blown away. He owned 4 NASCAR teams at one time, 4 Indy teams. I don't know how many people he brought, some of them. And the first year championship car for Dealer. So all the big teams had 3 or 4 cars per season. This is one of the 3 cars, 4 cars that we had. This is the first year the Dealer won a championship, and we got the car here. We're still here as well. Any questions up here? Well, Bruce has all the reasons to we have the name of the Senior was the guy that went to jail for murder and drug running and all kinds of other things. So, personally, I'm not a big fan of the colorway of this car. In fact, I think it's rather blasé. But somebody one time in his head, John Paul Senior was colorblind. So one time in his head, his wife said, "Oh, you look good in blue and yellow." So all his cars became blue and yellow. All his Porsches. The guy was colorblind. He had no idea what he was looking at. He couldn't tell it was blue and yellow. So he told him blue and yellow. Well, she meant dark blue and yellow. All the cars came out both blue and yellow. But that was, he was colorblind, so true story. Then he got out, his son got out of jail, who was also a drug addict. And then that guy had some health problems, and they were thinking about getting him a race team. This is a true story. They're thinking about getting him a race team. And the company that was doing his medication wanted to sponsor him. That just didn't seem right, because it wasn't Pfizer, and a drug addict being sponsored by a drug dealer being sponsored by a drug company probably doesn't work. But the heralded race cars. The Whittington brothers also went to jail for drug running, but John Paul sadly went to jail for murder. Not sadly, he was deserving of going to jail for murder. John Paul Sr. John Paul Jr. just went for drug running. So the father-son team were one of the most successful racing teams in the world, but all their money came from drug running. So it's amazing what money will buy. What's that? This thing's super fast. Porsche, because he got in trouble with the law before he ever got busted for murder. Porsche said, "We're not sponsoring you anymore." So he went to Greenwood, who made this Corvette. They went to Greenwood and said, "I want to go beat Porsche." And of course, they couldn't beat him, and he was really frustrated. It wasn't very reliable. It was more the key. Too much horsepower in a little small blocky wheel. to go around the track for endurance racing. Just it's maybe why Chevy's never won the law overall for a big car. They just don't have the endurance. But anyways, cool story. We're gonna go on the catwalk. Oh wait, one more car. Sorry, the Volvo. So technically, I think with the car, I overweigh the car. So it can only be 350 pounds, including driver. This was made as a benefit. All the cars were from the very beginning, were going to be sold at auction. All the money from the auctions were going to go to various charities. But it's literally a glorified soapbox derby car. And all the major manufacturers, Volkswagen, Porsche, Mini Cooper, Rolls-Royce, Volvo, all the major European manufacturers made a car. This car went 67 miles an hour at Jack's Peak in Carmel with no motor. It's little bicycle wheels, little disc brakes, little mechanical disc brakes. That's how you lift up the wheel to get inside. I do fit.
So who fit?
I do. You just kept with the hood. You just kept with the top down. But all the drivers weighed about 150 pounds, and the cars themselves weigh about 200 pounds. So 350 was the max where they could weigh total, and 67 miles an hour. But $1 million design right here. And then Bruce bought this at auction at Barrett Jackson, and it was the prettiest of the cars. The Rolls Royce was pretty good looking. The Porsche you laid down in forward. It had these big giant wheels, and you laid in it forward, and you steered with your hands this way. Kind of an odd thing, but very cool. If you look it up, they raced it 2 years, 2005 and 2006. So you can look up this little soapbox derby cars, and they raced it at Pikes Peak. They did it Monterey Week. They not Pikes Peak, at Jack's Peak, and it won the race. This was the championship car both years, and the Rolls Royce was the next best one. I think they made a Bentley one too. $1 million car. With no motor. And we're big into motorcycles. That's what I actually do more than I drive, is riding motorcycles. It's my biggest thing. 1969 model 68 Voltaco, 3-year only with the coattail back end. We have a 1919 Indian somewhere around here. This is a 1927 Indian board tractor. That's a flat tractor, sorry. The other one's a board tractor. Some cool stuff. The Scotty Parker Harley Davidson XR750s around the corner. So, and Scotty actually gave that to Bruce as a gift. I think it was his 7th championship bike. He won. So every time he won a championship, they gave him a bike. How many can you have in your garage if you don't like? So he gave it to Bruce, and then that bike actually had cast wheels on it, and Bruce put the spokes on it to make it look like a proper flat track bike. Cool photo. Let's go on the catwalk this way. Go on, keep walking. We're all in the back. We're going to race first.
Work here. No, I haven't seen the blue one before. Literally, there's like a 370. This is this angle right here. Maybe that's where they got the shit like, bro. Right? That's what I'm saying. It looks like a 3. That's why I said it was a 370. I was like, what the heck? The 370 is like a Nismo, right? Nismo spec 370. There's more than one go with it. Oh, yeah, that's one. Oh yeah, I need some more.
I like to call it separation of church and state. So everything on the right is state, everything on the left is kind of otherworldly projects. And then behind that, the wall is not the Wizard of Oz, but it's the race shop. How kind of how we do this? Obviously, we built this building, if everybody remembers, was a Seagate building. So it was their warehouse. And this all was warehouse space, including the back. And that used to be divided. There was no passageway through. And so it kind of worked well because I already had all the loading ramps and things like that. But when Bruce came in, we put in all the hydraulic lifts, cut the hole in the concrete to put the alignment rack at exactly level so you could drive lowered cars on. Didn't have to worry about all those problems that other people worry about. Made it really simple for one person to drive on by themselves. There's a mirror in front of it. So we really thought this out, built all the shelves, all the workbenches are on the left side, the other worldly side, are literally for the projects, and they're all, chest high, they're not kitchen counter low. So guys are comfortable, they can work, for long periods of time in the same spot. But everything basically on the right side of the car, on the right side right now is cars that are being reconditioned typically either for clients, like the Jaguar XJ15, that dark blue car. That's for a client who drives that car regularly, so it's here for service. The 73 RS, the signal yellow car, that's for sale. The white one just sold on the end. The 300 SL going, I think just sold. That car was prepped and sold. So these cars are getting ready for delivery, or they're getting ready to go on the showroom floor. The little 356 gray one over there, that was a Vashik Polak car that we bought from the original owner. It had been repainted at one point, needed some work, wasn't in great shape paint-wise, but no rust. So we kind of took it and made it into an outlaw car. The little sky blue with red interior car was just restored, not by us, but we just bought that car and it sold within 3 days. And then on the other side, which when we get down there, you'll see, we do the 959. So I think we have 4 959s in there right now. The little car right here, the kind of fashion gray roof with the titanium wheels. That car is, or magnesium wheels. That car is Bruce's personal car right now. I don't think it's for sale. But that's one of 730 horsepower roof turbo, street legal car. The 962 Canon car, Bruce will be driving the Art Sports car. That's his personal 962. He'll be driving that at Monterey. The number 6 Sunoco Mark Donahue car, that will be on the lawn at Pebble Beach. So that's number 3. So you've seen 2 of the 3. The yellow 400S Lamborghini Countach, that'll be on the lawn at Pebble Beach. So there's 4 of the 8, and then I'll show you the others when we go down there. We're working on this GT500 in the back. What else is over there? We're doing a couple other cool cars. There's a Cadillac Eldorado in the very corner. The year they had the clamshell headlight things. That car is being completely customized for a client. It's pretty unique what we've done. That's to wait till pictures come out, but being completely done. We have a double deep paint booth. So if you see these tractor trailers out here, Bruce does those in-house, but we have a facility out in Fresno that he owns called Concept Transporters, and all those transporters are made for various race teams for himself, and they're made out in Fresno. Well, his own personal ones, he brings here and he can drive them right into the paint booth. And it's double deep and double high. So, and there's, so we do those as well. But we can do 2 cars at a time in that, which is great. It's separated, so you can literally fit 2 cars. So you can have 2 cars being painted at any one time. And like I said, we do everything except for plating in-house. We have a full metal shop, we have a full engine bay room here. We don't do it like Ferrari motors in-house. We try to only do Porsche motors in-house because it limits our exposure. But we have the ability, if we have to do anything in-house. But we choose to let the respected better guys who do Ferraris all the time do the Ferrari motors, things like that. Just because it limits our exposure, it's entrusted, plus it frees up our man hours. We can only have so many people working here. There's not enough room. If we had another 30,000 square feet, it'd probably be filled up. There's just not enough room. So we can only have so many mechanics. The Gideon mechanics, we bring them from all over. All over. The guys from Europe. The Porsche guys who worked for Porsche in the day came out here. We did the 917 motors and trained our guys to build the 917 motors. They literally spent thousands of hours here. We were just putting them up in hotel rooms. And they came here and they trained our guys to build the motors. We now have a guy who did the Honda racing team, the Indy team, doing our motors now. So we got successful guys who are doing the motors for our race cars. But this is just an overview of what we're doing. Of course, the Gullwing, Rudge wheel car, all the 959s. I just did the math. I just bought the silver one over here. I bought for Bruce at the beginning of the year, even though I don't work here anymore. I bought that for him from Japan. I'm sorry, that car came from Europe. That's the 63rd 959 I've done of 290. It's 292 is what they've actually made for the street. So I've done 63 of them.
Now they're legal, right? They're legal here.
In the United States, not in California still. There's only 5 legal in California, and we did all 5. Yeah. And that was a nightmare. Now we're getting 800 horsepower out of those cars.
Wow.
So
And that's legal in California?
no, only 5. Though there are 5 legal ones. One of them's like at 750. We just haven't done the next upgrade. Now it's just all upgrades. It's because we've gone all Motronic systems on them. So it's just those cars were made. The 961, which is the street legal, their street race car. That car could make 900 horsepower. It's basically a 962 motor with twin turbos, and they were detuned for the street, so that all the drivetrain was made to be a race car. So they had to make their homologation cars. So the cars can handle 900 horsepower pretty easily. So we're at 800 horsepower. We're still under, and we've had no major failures on the car whatsoever.
And it still goes 200 miles an hour?
200 plus now. 800 horsepower. Yeah, they're doing all right. I haven't driven one personally at 200. I have been 200, but I have driven 200, but not in the 959. But Bruce has done it a few times, quite a bit over actually. I think the early car that we first made was like 560 horsepower. We did 211, and now they're probably closer to 230.
But they go 200 miles right off the...
Yeah, it's right at 200. That was their claim to fame.
Right off this assembly.
Yeah, because the F40 only did 198, and then they had to do the F50 that did 202 or 203, something like that. So that was when Ferrari and Porsche went head to head. We're doing that Ferrari Daytona, the blue car over there. That's a full restoration. We're doing in-house. What else are we doing restoration last year? Like I said, the Cadillac. And then the 959s, when we get down there, we'll show you what we do to those. Good overview of the shop, though, huh? Sure is. And we got Bruce's Pikes Peak truck out here. If you look out here on the left. So the little red Kenworth out there. So he still holds 2 records at Pikes Peak that will probably never be broken because now it's paved. So he owns single axle and dual axle semi-tractor records, and because now it's paved, you can't rotate the truck to spin him around the corner. So he'll never those records will never be beat, and he's held those records since the early 2000s. So both those records he's had for a long time. I don't think those records. So he drove that Kenworth with, I forget the horsepower, but it was like 6,800 pounds of torque or something crazy like that. It was animal. And the tires had to be bolted on like a beaded lock, but all the tires had to be bolted on so they didn't roll off the side of the rim.
The tires themselves.
Bolted onto the wheels, yeah.
Do they drill holes?
Drill holes through them, and then they had 2 mooses inside to hold air.
I've never heard
Yeah.
of that.
Where's that Cadillac that you said?
There's a black Eldorado in the corner over there. You can't see it. It's kind of hidden by all the racks. But we're doing that for a client, and the custom work we've done on that car would blow your mind. It's easier to wait until it comes out to photographs, because that car will be photographed. It'll be in magazines. It's going to be over the top. Front wheel drive, so you don't have any floor, tunnel, so you have a completely flat floor inside the car. It's great for first dates. Any questions up here? It's a car that we just sold. I don't know that car. Wasn't a car that first time here, first time it sold right away. I'll figure you guys out. That's just a like GT500. So they're like 1.6, 1.7.
Everything on interior, everything. 950.
I'll show you in a second. It's kind of hard to get through. So,
So the southern room is what you said was.
yeah, we're gonna go that, and that's the race shop. We'll go back. That's where all the guys are working. So maybe what put Bruce on the map, besides his ability to drive a car, is the 959s. It's a pretty storied history with these cars. Obviously, the battle of Ferrari and Porsche is real. But Porsche was in a bit of a financial problem when they made this car. And what they chose to do is they had 500 sold, and 200 plus of those were the United States. And what they did in their infinite wisdom is they decided to make up a story saying the car didn't pass crash testing. And so 200 people didn't get their cars. Well, the reason why they didn't do that is because they were losing about 100,000 Deutsche Marks at the time for every car they delivered. So they were losing money, and that would have put them back, 2 plus, it would have put them back a lot of money. And they just couldn't afford it. And the car only had to make 250 for homologation, so they decided that they're just going to stop there. And they made 292 street cars. I think it's 312 cars total. That includes race cars, prototypes, 961s, and then the cars they race car to car. So what happened is, you heard the story of Bill Gates wanted a car. So he bought a car, and it sat on a dock for 11 years because he couldn't get in the country. But there was one guy who bought one in, and Bruce had one here in Santa Cruz, literally the year they came out, on a tourist visa. And Bruce just saw that there's a lot of place to go with this. And there was another guy who was a very wealthy, prominent Bay Area guy, and he had a car, and he had some really good friend in the DMV, and he had some really good friend with DOT, and he got this car signed off. Unfortunately, what happened is that car, and true story, was on the cover of Auto Week going across the Golden Gate Bridge. And all of a sudden, hellfire and fury came out. Because, of course, what happened is now the DOT and all those companies and the government, American government agencies, wanted to impound all the cars. Hence, what happened is Bill Gates' car sat in port. This car was impounded that was going across the Golden Gate Bridge. Bruce was sitting down here in a little shop on Water Street, and he had 5 of them back there, covered in dust because he couldn't do anything with them. And he had some guy out there sitting in a car at the Ford store looking across. And Bruce went and knocked up on the window and said, "Can I help you?" He said, "Well, you're Bruce Canepa." Well, he had all the paperwork to sit here. Cars weren't being driven. They hadn't turned a wheel. You could tell because there was dust all over them. They were just sitting, waiting for this thing to happen. So that put him in touch with a guy who was a really good friends with what is the most important entity of the U.S. government, is the guy who controls the ports. And basically that guy got him to the right guy, so one Watergate Square and all those litigators and all those guys who make all these bills that pass got together, and when Clinton was president, they put this bill on the piggybacked on the back of another bill with the help of Jerry Seinfeld, with the help of Bill Gates, with the help of a few other billionaires. And they got this bill passed, what we call show and display. That show and display came out and said, basically what it did is, car couldn't drive more than 2,500 miles a year. The car had to have production numbers less than 500. The car had to be out of production, so it couldn't be a modern or the current model year car. So the cars had to be out of production. And one last caveat, they had to be of special significance. Porsche 959. So all of a sudden, from 0 to 100, now all of a sudden people are scrambling to get the 5 cars Bruce had. Bill Gates' car, his car that was going across the bridge in San Francisco, Jerry Seinfeld's car. All these cars now needed to be, and the way this rule was passed is they did not have to pass crash testing, which by the way was a complete fabrication. Porsche just didn't send the cars to crash test because they couldn't afford to send 2 cars to crash test. So basically, Bruce could probably tell the story better than me, but what happened is show and display happened. Now all these cars now had to pass smog, and they had to be plus 10% of what current regulations were. So the cars are twin turbocharged. That wasn't going to be really hard to do. You could add catalytic converters. You could do a lot of other stuff. The problem is they passed smog right away. And how much horsepower did they lose, Bruce? First time? Like lots. Okay. So 450 horsepower is what they have stock. They dropped down to like 350, 325 by the time you added all this stuff. Nobody wanted a Porsche. Come on, by that time they were making GT2s. They were making other cars that had that much horsepower. Now all of a sudden they were like, these cars aren't special anymore. So Bruce then had an idea. Well, let's go back and re-engineer. These cars were evolutionary, over the top. Everything about the cars were completely cutting edge, but they never had a cycle like a regular production car. They didn't go through a cycle of recalls. They didn't go through a cycle of production. They were built one way only, and all of a sudden, now after 10 or 12, 15 years, they were starting to have problems that were showing up. So they needed to be reconditioned, even if they didn't have any miles on them. So it was at that moment Bruce went the other way, and we started doing the cars. The very first car they did after Bruce's things were 550 and change horsepower. So, and they passed smog almost instantaneously. They were so clean, and they now had more horsepower. And then again, they went within a couple months, they were making 650 horsepower. And we've certified, and California is still the biggest pain in the butt. There's only 5 in the world that are certified to drive on California roads with the California plate on them. Bruce did all those cars, and those are all about 550 to 650. They're the first generation cars. So back about 3 years ago, Bruce decided when he got his white car from Japan that we brought in, he wanted to make a new special car, because now these cars are 30 plus years old. These things are starting to run into their own problems, and now they just sit, and so every system has to be gone through. They have hydraulic suspension on them, so they lift, and they have problems. They have air conditioning systems that are super complicated. They're also a 962 race motor, so they're air and water cooled at the same time. So they have a bunch of problems, and these things are now not been dealt with for 35 years. So he decided to go with what we call the SC. So his white car is the very first, and make cars to be bespoke. So they're one-off, all Porsche colors. That's oak metallic green. That's what that color is. That's the very first. That's the prototype color for the 1975 Porsche Turbo that was on the cover of Road and Track. That's the color that was on that car. So they're all Porsche colors, and he decided he was going to make these 50 cars is what his first initial goal was. I think we made 12 or 13 so far. But Bruce's was number 1. I think that's number 3. This is like number 12. We're doing another one there, the metallic gray. So he's making them all these colors. He's gonna, and basically now they're 800 and change horsepower.
Are you building them from scratch?
No, we're taking all the Ford, we're tearing them down just like you see here. We're tearing them all the way down, taking all the suspension off, and we take all the hydraulics off. This one has the shocks. We're replacing the shocks with custom-made shocks. We're shaving about 250 pounds of weight overall. Taking all the hydraulic lifts off, putting what the S was, because he made 24 S's. Taking all the S's had the non-adjustable suspension. Taking all that adjustability off, putting the S suspension on, fully custom valve, titanium springs, completely over the top, and just changing the turbochargers and the motronics.
So they don't go up and down on the road?
They don't go up and down anymore. And then we've made custom-made, the same wheel that made, the company that made the wheel, was a 17. You can't get high-performance 17-inch tires, like, you just can't. There's nobody who makes a decent one. Michelin stopped making them a few years ago. So now we make an 18-inch wheel for it as well. That is made by the exact same manufacturer, the exact same design, but now it's 18-inch so you can get proper wheels on it, or proper tires on it. So they can handle the 200 plus miles an hour that these cars can do. Oh no, by the way, they're also 800 horsepower, so now they go 0 to 60 in under 2 seconds. So, because they're all-wheel drive, they're just, this is basically faster than most any modern supercar on the planet, because they get the traction to the ground. They're lightweight, they're under 3,000 pounds.
I have a burning question. You know,
Yes.
I've always wondered, when this car came out, Porsche, it could go 200 miles an hour
Right,
off the
yep.
line.
Yep.
And Porsche spec'd it at 197. I've always been curious why they didn't say, I mean, that's sort of a,
Because not everyone would do 200 every time. And it's like that thing, is like, if my car won't do 200 that moment, you can
Okay.
go back to Porsche and say,
so they were just being cautious. It
being
wasn't
cautious.
any.
Because, you know, that all comes into a bunch of stuff. The air temperature, you know, how the car's running. Too many things, too many variables to get that every time, right?
Yeah, but flat 200, that would be a real claim to fame.
Well, they were the first car to technically reach it. It's
Yeah.
not, the F40 just missed it, and then the F50 is the one that broke the barrier and stayed there, right? So
Yeah.
that was the fight. But ultimately, then we do the full interiors. That's all done in house as well. Custom, and they're literally painted. They're all the cars. They only made 4 basic colors: white, silver, red, and then a metallic black they made 20 of, and then regular black they made 4 of. And then they made a host of paint to sample colors for some wealthy Saudi guy, and he had 21 of them personally, and all of them were different color. So, and we bought one of his blue ones at one point. I bought one of his green ones. We bought a few of them here. His metallic red one I had. So, like I say, 63 now of the 292 I personally sourced for Bruce. That's the last one I sourced for Bruce, the silver one there, that we're just now tearing apart. And now, and is this Bruce's car? This is Bruce's here, I think. No, this isn't Bruce. But Bruce has a white one with dark brown interior. But we'll make them any way you want. So they're basically just, we tear them all down and make them any way you want. And all we're doing is really just making them mechanically sound. And nothing that we take off, you could technically put all the turbos and put it all back to stock, but why would you? All the hydraulic parts can be put back on typically. We do take off the one, there's 3 holes on these cars, one for air, gas, and oil, or for the hydraulics, gas, and oil. So we take off one of them, so you only have 2 holes on the car now.
Was this the one that was in the 30th floor of a building
I don't remember which one was which.
in Japan?
I can't remember all of them. Like I said, 63. I bought this car in Germany. That's all I remember. And it had been sitting. I'd argued with the guy for like 4 months before he finally got the deal done. Car didn't, like, none of the systems worked. The lift didn't work, the air conditioning didn't work, and he still wanted more money than the one that did work. But we got it worked out. So this is, I don't know what color it's going to be, but it's going to be completely torn down. The water taking door panels out. They're going down. They're stripped all the way down. And these are Kevlar cars with aluminum doors. So, right, they're Kevlar, first kind of, aluminum doors and aluminum roof. Or aluminum roof.
So with the rebuilds, you guys rebrand them, or you just
959, and that's it. They're still 959. We don't change the look of them. They don't look any different. We're not doing any. And so that's the hydraulics system right there.
Lose a lot of weight, this will take it.
Oh yeah, just tons of weight. Plus we do titanium springs. Again, this car is running pebbles, so this is number 4. Yes, that, this, 2 upstairs, and then the back is 3 rings. Bugatti EV110. This is, Bugatti just got sold again. That company, Riken, not Riken, they're making supercars. It's like a small, I can't think of it.
The European company?
Yeah.
No, I thought.
And Porsche owns 25% of it. So Porsche stayed in. Volkswagen separated itself completely, and Porsche stayed in at 25%. But that's an EV110. That is arguably kind of one of the coolest Bugattis of all time. It's a monster quad turbo, super fast car. Michael Schumacher, it was his favorite car until he got an Enzo. Some say that's why he built an Enzo. Very rare, 38 car, 98 car. I don't remember what it is. I've never bought it. I've sold one, a silver one to Peter Mullen, but I don't know much about them because I don't have to know about them. I try not to. Too much stuff in my head already.
You don't want to push anything back.
Yeah, hard enough remembering all my kids' names.
How about the Ferrari here? Is this the daily driver?
This we just got in, and it just sold. This is a really good friend of Bruce's and mine. Drummer Doc, up in the east side. And then, so it came in and sold already. The mirrors going to auction with the clients, which just gives you details. This last Countach, this is number 5. That's the other car going to Pebble Beach. It'll be on the lawn with the yellow one. No, that was the Yeah, we can do whatever we need to, because like we did the very first Duesenberg, he asked what paints we can use. And Duesenberg didn't have 2-stage, 3-stage, multi-stage paints. They were lacquered. Because we are not considered a body shop, we are a restoration facility, and because we do so little painting overall, we do not, and plus we're in Scotts Valley, which is actually, it's such a clean area, that we're actually, just between us, we stay out of the rules of typical California. They come in, it's fully accessible, they can come anytime they want, but we're not ever hit by them because we don't have to use the new water-based paints if we don't need to. I mean, so like the very first Duesenberg, to use the water-based paints would. But we restored that car here over a 2.5-year period of time, and it was best of. It got Chairman's Award at Pebble Beach, and that was the very first road-going Duesenberg, and it's still in the same family's hands even to this day. So, and we restored it here, and it was back to its original. It was very cool, and I mean all of that stuff. And we had to get this guy who does all of Jay Leno's cars. His guy came up here and was one of the consultants on the car. But that car was here in like 2.5 years, and then went to the lawn. But we have that ability. Like these Ferraris weren't made, the Daytona over there, these Miras, they weren't done with good paint. The yellow Lamborghini is a pretty good idea of how terrible Italian paint is. Because like literally it's got paint lines in the back. Yeah, and that's they weren't Pebble Beach ready here. This is detail all that.
God, just know how to do it.
These are when you don't like them. He said these are going out to Pebble Beach.
It's like moving around wraps back there.
I want to hear some of the stuff run.
That's the metal shop.
Well, we're here, depending on where you're at. This is just what they're doing. What is this over there? Porsche? That's what you have. Oh, that's not an empty event, right? That's a
Prototype paint truck.
Cobra. Oh, here's the rest of the pagoda.
All down the metal.
And I don't know what he's doing with that. I don't know if it's for a client or if it's going to be for sale.
Oh, this is pretty so clean too.
I love these cars.
Yeah, 908 chassis. Or body, I guess, not chassis, but those things are wicked.
First of all, the top that goes on it does have a top. It's ridiculous.
That's funny.
It's like a Bimini for a road. No, it's a socket. And it's just the way they look. It was a car that was a coupe at one point.
Yeah, for plus, you have to go over, they could wet sand it and get it out. Mark 1 GT.
Butt first, just remember butt first. No, no mirror, that's the way it is in there. It does have a reading mirror, right? That's the only mirror it's got. A mirror would mess up the lines. Come on, let's be honest. It would totally mess up the lines.
You just need that periscope.
Yeah. Well, they have. That's what they have. That's why they call this periscope. Reverse.
And that's all you got?
That's all you get. Let's go back to the race shot.
Oh, is it? It's a first, yeah. You have to sign this contract, but you won't flip them within a year.
This used to be called cold storage. Before they put the door in right there, it was freezing out there. Remember that one?
I try to forget.
So, it's like that in the sea gate when it's not cold, it's hot cold. The ships have to come out and they can drag it. Everything would go off the back. All that was warehouse and that hot cold filter box. But this was kind of, we put the door in, and there's always, it's really good to have this in this section. But this became the race shop. The race shop used to be on the other side, and we just keep getting bigger. Now this is the race shop and storage. This Ford GT here, 40, is going to Pebble. So that's technically the 8th car. And Peter, being from Great Britain, he's probably the only guy who knows anything about those cars, and Big Ron. But that car is going to Pebble. Yeah, it'll be done. That's why you can't talk to them. If it's not done, they're going to blame you. But that car will be done. And that car was, it's a pretty famous car. That's the car that was in a garage. There's a whole bunch of boxes all over it. It's yellow. But that's the car that they ran. Originally it was a street car. And then it turned into a race car and a race yellow. So the gentleman who owns the car turned it back into the street car in the Princess Blue. This is Bruce's 935. It's a car he loves to race. Probably it is his favorite car to drive, probably. Day in, day out. The new modern Speedtail. This is Bruce's car. 3 seat, summer seat driver. Drive from the center. And all you were saying, you want to come all the way over here.
Sounds story.
So anybody want to know what the fastest 300 SL going on the planet is?
It's on the cover of the
That right there. This one right here. This is the car that did 197 miles an hour at Bonneville. It's the car that had the huge hood scoop sitting out the front. This is the car. So this is Bruce's personal car. Car we tried to get for a long time. And finally, the gentleman who owned the car, a big collector from LA, also a big 300 SL enthusiast, he finally said yes to the deal. It's got the Outlaw motor, the hot rod motor that came with the car. It's got the original block for it. We're making this into a hot rod, or Bruce is making this into a hot rod. So it's going to be proper Rudge wheels with disc brakes behind it. So it's going to be a real Rudge wheel car with disc brakes, which is a kind of a little complicated. It's going to have a hot rod motor. So it's going to be bored out to like 3.7 liters, something like that. It's going to make a lot of horsepower. It's going to have a 5-speed gearbox. We've already done this one other time in a Roadster, so we know it works. So we're doing a 5-speed gearbox. It looks the part, still sits on this small little stem for the shifter, small little shift knob, but it's going to be a proper Gertrag 5-speed gearbox that works in there perfectly. Going to be fully gone through, fully restored. I don't know if he's picked a color yet. You might have to ask him. But it did 197 miles an hour at Bonneville. And arguably, maybe the most, it's the first supercar ever made, we already know that. But maybe the most iconic car besides the 911 on the planet. What year? It's a 57.
What year did they get the record in?
70s, at the 8K class. So raced against a lot of other cars. But these cars are just cool. Now I was fortunate, I lived in Manhattan Beach. My mom wasn't very wealthy. We lived in a little apartment next to an AMPM store. No joke. But there was a medical office that was right next to us. It was a quad level medical office. It had the subterranean parking. It was really cool. And the hill to go into the subterranean was pretty epic. And so I'd take my skateboard there on the weekends when nobody was there. And I'd ride my skateboard down the hill and go into the perfect floors in the subterranean garage and come through. And every single Saturday, one of the doctors had a gull wing in there. And he was always parked on the right-hand side. And I would come in and I'd go to the left just to stay away from his gull wing. And one day he comes down and he says, I really appreciate it. I watch you every day and you come in here every Saturday. And he goes, I watch you, and he goes, and you always go left. He goes, why do you do that? I said, well, I'm better on my backside, which isn't really true, but I became better on my backside, I think, because of that. But I literally would stay as far away from his car as he could. And it was silver, red interior, and I would literally, and then I'd be done, I'd walk over and kind of kneel, and I'd look, and I had my little those little crappy 110 film cameras, and I'd take little pictures of it, and I still have some of those pictures, but it was the first time I ever saw it going in person, and it was there every single Saturday. It's the only day he drove it to the shop, to his work, and he was a doctor, and he was on the top floor. Turns out he also owned the building, and then he had one of his other doctors, or an attorney who had one of the front-facing offices, had a black Turbo Carrera, 1977, 76, first year they were available in America, and a black Turbo Carrera, and he parked on the opposite side. I'd still come in and do the left and just stay away from his 930. But I would never get close to that gull wing with my skateboard. I would always stay over there and then walk over with my skateboard to get close to it. But just so cool. And he showed me how to get in. He's like, always ask first, slide across, never put your feet in first because you'll never get back. You'll never get in. You'll never get in. And the steering wheel drops down and they make it easier. But he showed me all that stuff. Just a really nice guy. And had it forever. But this is a cool car. This is my favorite story in all the business. Every year we get cars. I've been doing this a long time. I bought a few of my unicorn cars. That 934 and a half, that blue car right there, the Sunoco blue car. That car is the only 934 and a half of the 10 that was made with 934 body. So it's got the little 77 tail on the back. It doesn't have the big tail. It doesn't have the big giant flares for 934 and a half. It's the only 934 and a half bodied by Porsche is a 934. That was a unicorn car. I bought the only black 934 ever built. It was 934s were the previous car to that. It was in Japan. I bought that car. I bought the Tyrrell 6-wheel P26. I bought that car in Europe. That was a really great story. The car was a 76, supposed to have 76 bodywork with it, and the 77 bodywork. It was used in the movie Rush. The car guy here didn't have the 76 bodywork. The guy had argued with me about selling me the car. I had a signed contract from the dealer who was selling it. And long story short, basically in Great Britain, once you've given a dealership license to sell their car. The owner can't go around that dealership and sell the car. Well, the owner was trying to go around the dealership and sell the car. So basically, I threatened the guy with a lawsuit, still got the P26, but didn't get the 76 bodywork. The guy kept the bodywork because the reason why the guy who bought the 76 bodywork and was buying the car wanted the 76 bodywork for his 77 because he wanted his kid, he had both, but both of his were 77. He wanted one for his son in 77 livery and one for him in 76 livery. So that guy ended up with the 76 bodywork. We ended up selling that car, but it used to be up there where the Indy cars at, the orange Indy car up top. That was one of my unicorn cars. 911R, 67 911R was one of my unicorn cars. This car wasn't a unicorn. I bought and sold lots of BMW M1s. This car was a car that actually, I've never almost been fired for. He yelled at me and fired me like full time on the showroom floor, but I never worked for him as a payroll on the payroll. I was always an independent contractor. We always had a really great relationship, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. He was a great mentor, great guy. I bought this car, and it was an AJS company which only made 11 M1s, and they had this really wacky body kit on it, and it was bought in Texas. And I sent the guy from the M1 registry, the guy who started the M1 registry, to look at the car, and the guy said the car it had some paint flaws, but the car was really good. That's what he said. And this is the guy who started the M1 registry. So the car arrives, and I'm about ready to jump on a plane to go to Cavallino, the Ferrari show in Florida. And the car arrives, and I'm like, I drove by to go to the airport, and I drove by, and I'm like, and the car gets off the transporter, oil everywhere. Bruce started the car, and it smoked and oil everywhere. The interior was completely shot. The paint wasn't a little bad. It had this trapezoidal weird paint on it, and it was like 17 different shades of gray. It was terrible. And I paid big money for the car. I mean, I was like, oh my God. And Bruce is like, he's screaming and yelling at me like, what you doing? And I'm like, hey, whoa. I've always taken, and my skin in the game is you pay my company, you don't pay me. So, I'm not on payroll. My skin is you don't pay me until you're happy with the car. I'll find a buyer for the car. Don't worry about it. Let me get to Cavallino because I'm trying to go buy you more cars, and I'll deal with it when I get back. I said, but do not call Tom Price. Tom Price owns a Mercedes, he owns a McLaren store and a BMW store. Don't call Tom Price because he's bought a bunch of other cars from Bruce. And I said, don't call him yet. Let me try to sell the car. So I'm flying to Fort Lauderdale. I go to this little shop in Fort Lauderdale, and it's a really good friend of mine who I've done a lot of business with. And I sit in his shop, and he's on the phone, and I sit down. There's a book up on his bookshelf, and it's BMW M1 history, and it's not even been opened yet. And I asked him, Ed, and he's like, yeah, and he's on the phone. He said, grab it. So I unwrapped the book, and I'm looking through it, and I'm like, and I'm going through, and it's got a list of all the 299 M1s they built, and every single one of them. And I'm looking, I'm like, our chassis number's 91, right? I'm like, so I call City John, that's the guy who handled our marketing department. Is that chassis 91 I just bought, that M1? He's like, I think so. I said, well, can you pull it up on the computer? And I'm not getting any Wi-Fi right now, and I can't see what my contract says. Because, yeah, it's chassis 91. Like, perfect. I snap a cover of the book. I send it to John as the picture of the book. And I said, John, make sure that's on my desk when I arrive Wednesday morning. So get that book on order and get it to my desk Wednesday morning. And he's like, what are you talking about? I said, just give me this book. So I walk into Bruce's office. I get back on Wednesday. I walk into Bruce's office about 6 o'clock that night, just finally having a chance to catch up. He's like, what are we doing about that M1? And I said, well, I don't think we're doing anything about it right now. I open the book, and it's chassis 091, pro car, never raced, sent to AJC. And that means that it was literally a race car that they never raced, and it would have been turned into an AJC. So this piece of crap I bought became the most valuable car that I'd ever, not most valuable car I'd ever bought, the most biggest delta from what it was when I paid for it to what it's actually worth. And nobody knew it was an pro car. So Bruce, now mind you, BMW had lost a bunch of stuff in a fire. Funny how the Germans do that. Porsche had lost a bunch of stuff in a fire too. Lost a bunch of records. But they knew they had records for all the M1s built. They just couldn't find them because they had took all the stuff they could save and they had to go salvage it. It took BMW 2 more years to get us a heritage certificate to say that it was actually a pro car, never raced, right? So then at that mark, Bruce decided to take the car to the next level and get all the factory pro car parts and turn this car into a pro car for the street. Because this car had now been plated, it was a certified street car done by this company that only made 11 of them, and we can now turn it into a street car, but a pro car street car. So it's got a 4-liter motor instead of a 3.5. It's pushing out 400 horsepower instead of 300 horsepower. It's like 425 horsepower actually. We've done some really cool things. So it is all the BMW M1s fill from right here. Okay, the race cars had the race fill, right? But what we've done, rather than have the dry brake, which it still has, you can literally twist it off and you can just fill up at a regular gas station. Rather than using a dry brake, because this is for quick filling a race car. But we still kept the dry brake system. Completely did the interior. They made one BMW M1 in this color. So Bruce thought, well, two of the 299 would not be bad. We did it a proper M1 color, put the BBS fans on it, the BBS wheels, center lock hubs, full trick, and then what I paid, I'm not even going to tell you what I paid. Let's just say even when Bruce was done, he made more than triple what he was in the car. So we did okay. So what, the argument we had, I said, and I tell you, and Bruce was patient. I said, it's a pro car. BMW will verify it. I promise. The guy who wrote the book was the foremost. He used to work for BMW. He was the foremost on this. And Bruce waited the 2 years for BMW to send that certificate because he believed that I was right, and we did it. And then Tom Price, of course, wanted to buy it when it was still an AJS car, but he didn't. Bruce didn't sell it to him. He waited it out and trusted me, and then we sold it to a guy in Malibu who loves it and drives it all the time. And it just did the Hillsborough Concourse. This was at Hillsborough. It just got the chairman's award at Hillsborough. We didn't even want to judge it, but it wasn't judged. They just gave it the chairman's award. But it is a cool car. And talk about an unbelievable car to drive. An inline six with 425 horsepower is a magical sounding motor with carburetors and it's just a magical sounding motor. It sounds so good. That's gonna sound kind of the same way, except for those are inline sixes, tractor motors laid over. They're not quite the same inline six, but they are really cool. And I mean but it's cool to have two inline six cars in a row, and the later of the versions. And BMW will never make a car like this again.
Is this back in the collection?
No.
Or a private owner?
Yeah, private owner. Just here for service. So he sends it here for service. And this car was a Lamborghini BMW collaboration. The first 75 cars were actually put together by Lamborghini. So that yellow Countach out there, that's how bad the paint was on this when they came from the factory. Yeah, that's how bad they were. They were terrible. They really were. And they're all fiberglass cars. There's nothing. And they're not light. They're over 3,000 pounds, but they are cool to look at, and they are really nice to drive. Once you get up to speed, can you stop? Yes. Yeah. Oh my God, whatever. You have to take one car down at a time and roll it out. Yeah. But believe it or not, we can do each one in about 9 minutes. It's pretty quick. Oh, somebody was asking about a Camry. We do have a Camry up there. It's not mine, but we do have a Camry. The Sunoco car over there, it's not for sale yet, but that is going to be a street legal 934 and a half. The 934s and 934 and a half had factory 911, they had VIN numbers on the 911, so they start 911. So they're actually, their VIN numbers on it, so they can actually protect the register. So that car will be a 700 horsepower 1975. So this car's going to Pebble Beach as well. And then the white LM car with the big tail up there, Goodyear LM on the white red up on the tail, that's going to Laguna, going to Pebble Beach as well. So five 917s, two Lamborghini Countaches, and the GC40. Those are the 8 cars that we have going to Pebble Beach. Three more. Red, white, this is one we sold before and just like that. Any other questions?
Is how you'd have the little exhaust just straight out of the turbo to spit fire. So you'd have the main exhaust piece of it.
After owning this, I didn't like it. Like I said, I think a 250 short wheelbase is probably the probably one. Right now. He often asks, if you find one under X amount of money, they need a restoration. But of course, they're never that kind of money. He wants to buy the cheapest one ever made. Or the cheapest one for sale. You know, nobody will sell it. He'll never get it. Oh, my pleasure. Please let me know about your final. Nice to meet you. Okay.
Upgrading?
Thank you.